Hello and welcome to Long Live Hooky Street, the podcast where we rewatch and discuss every episode of Britain's most beloved TV comedy, Only Fools and Horses. I'm Jenny and I'm joined all the way from Hong Kong by my co-host and sister Heather. Say hello, dude.
Hello! Today we are discussing Series 1, Episode 6, The Russians Are Coming. So grab a 5-ton of canned food and let's get started. This episode aired on the BBC at 8:30 p.m. on Tuesday the 13th of October, 1981. Viewing figures are all the way up to 8.8 million this week, the highest since Big Brother. Still airing in the same time slot between the Rockford Files and the 9 o'clock news. And we have a new UK number one song this week. It's My Party, a cover by Dave Stewart and Barbara Gaskin. Also, we have a new movie as the UK number one this week, which is Endless Love with Brooke Shields. I have not seen that.
No.
Or heard the song.
Yes, you have heard the song.
Have I?
Think about it.
How does it go?
You've heard the song, dude. It's my party.
It's my party and I cry
if
I
want
want
to.
Oh, right. That's what
it's
it
a
is.
cover.
Okay.
But yes, you have heard the song.
Oh.
I knew you were going to say you hadn't, but you have to always think about it. If it's a famous song, you've probably heard it.
Well, that's great. So, dude, do you have some trivia for us this week?
Yes, I do. So we're going to look a little bit here at John Sullivan's writing history because it's quite important for this episode. So some people will know that John Sullivan's first TV writing success actually came from a sitcom that he wrote called Citizen Smith, which aired on the BBC from 1977 to 1980, right before Only Fools and Horses. The show starred Robert Lindsay as the young Marxist revolutionary from Tooting. 4 series aired on the BBC before Sullivan decided he had taken the lead character as far as he could go and he wanted to try something new. So, a quote from the lovely Jubbly anniversary book says, "With its topical leanings, The Russians Are Coming has all the hallmarks of something written for the unmade 5th series of Citizen Smith. This episode is notable for its stage play-like structure and setting, and particularly for Grandad's expressing harrowed memories of the First World War, something John Sullivan would never have written for Citizen Smith." Another quote here directly from John Sullivan. "Every so often I would dip my toe into the water to see how far we could push the more serious issues. Grandad's heartfelt speech about the treatment of young men in the First World War came from my own grandfather. He was in World War I and he saw terrible things that he never really spoke about. I remember one night after a few drinks him exploding and starting telling a terrible tale." So we'll talk more about it obviously as we go through, but yeah, this episode definitely has more serious elements and themes than any of the other episodes, probably in Series 1 or the entirety of Only Fools and Horses, so it's slightly different in vibes for that reason. But we'll get to that. First of all, shall we go ahead and do our rankings?
Yeah, okay, yeah, let's do that. So you probably know by now, prior to recording, we each independently rank all of the 64 episodes and we go through them with the episode each week and we reveal to each other and compare our rankings for each episode. So I don't know Jenny's rankings and she doesn't know mine. So let's go with yours first, dude. What did you rank this episode out of 64?
Okay, so my ranking for this one is 52.
Oh, wow. Okay. What's your reasons for that?
So, yeah, this episode is, again, it's on the higher side for my Series 1 rankings. I like this episode in its own right. I think whenever you compare it to the newer, more modern episodes of Only Fools and Horses and more comedy ones, I guess you could say, it's not that it's not a comedy, it still is a comedy, but it just has a lot more serious vibes, and like I said before, stage play like setting is a little bit different, not a lot of change of scenery. Some people love that about this episode, and the fact that it all takes place in one room essentially, and I do as well in some ways. I don't think it's ever going to make it up into my high rankings because I have so many more favorite episodes that I would choose to put on, but I still think it's good in its own right. Okay.
Well, I ranked this episode as 56 out of 64, so mine is 4 places lower than yours. I actually always feel that I put A Slow Bus to Chingford and The Russians Are Coming together when I think of episodes, because these 2 episodes to me have a very similar structure in the sense that they have the comedy-like bits at the beginning, and then we go to one setting and we have sort of a more serious conversation. Of course, the serious conversation in this one is far more serious than a Slow Buster Chingford, but the whole premise is kind of the same structure. And yes, I agree with you what you said about it seeming like a stage play, because it absolutely does. The part in the bunker that they construct, it absolutely could be a stage play, and it has very little jokes. And even the jokes sort of you feel a bit awkward laughing at them because of the nature of what they're discussing. So yeah, I think it is a very different type of episode to a lot of the others. And I think for that reason, rewatchability is quite low for me. I would never sort of put this episode on to cheer myself up, because Only Fools and Horses being a comedy, it's usually something people put on to sort of, I feel good, by the time you finish watching it. And I think this episode is one of the most difficult to process emotionally, even more so than like Strained Relations. When like one of the main characters dies, I still think this episode has a darker undertone. So yeah, I think overall this episode is not that rewatchable, and that's why it kind of went lower for me on the rankings. Again, it's not that it's bad, it's just it doesn't feel like an Only Fools and Horses episode.
Yeah, you're totally right. And interestingly, you have an IMDb ranking match this week. You and IMDb have the same ranking, 56 on IMDb. Although almost all of the user reviews on IMDb are 10 out of 10, the people who took the time to write a review. This episode is polarizing, but I would say for the most part, fans of Only Fools and Horses do think this episode is really good. In its own right. They don't tend to put it, some people do have it in their top 10. It like creeps up. Probably more likely, I would say, to be people that were maybe in their 20s and 30s when it aired. Because I think you may be having a little bit of the same of the memories of the kind of that Cold War kind of feel, the fear of war, maybe understanding the characters' perspectives. Anybody who has survivors of World War One that were still living with them at the time, it's got that very, it's got the vibe that maybe you would, if you had memories of it, it'll have a more of a special place in your heart, especially as a child. Again, I know we go back to this every week, but for me, it was uncomfortable to watch as a child because I didn't understand a lot of the references. And when I was a kid, I tended to, pull away from anything that wasn't like happy comedy, like physical comedy.
Yeah, absolutely. This is very dialogue heavy episode. I mean, they're just in a shelter. How much can they do, for that part of the episode, which is the part that everyone remembers. We will talk about the other parts of the episode as well. But yeah, I agree with you. I think I did not appreciate this episode at all when I was younger because I loved my Only Fools and Horses to be funny. And I can't honestly say that I find the majority of this episode funny. Of course, as an adult, you appreciate it a lot more. But
I was going to say that, I do actually remember when we got the VHSs for Series 1 because we were like older and already loved the show by the time we watched Series 1 and watching these episodes and thinking, wow, the show was really different in the first couple of series. It's not got the same, it's not as much comedy. It was almost like a mix of comedy and drama, or the comedy was written in a different way, which now as an adult I can appreciate. This more subtle comedy is actually really well written. Like, it's really good, well written. It's clever the way that it's written, but it's not the same as what people remember from later episodes. And I'm not saying that as a bad thing. It's in its own right. It's very good.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. I said it's not a bad episode. It just doesn't feel like an episode of Only Fools and Horses. That's my main criticism of it.
Yeah, but I would say that, like, if you instead of ranking your favorites overall, maybe if you were to go through and rank quality of script writing at the end, this episode would go up a lot higher because the script writing in some of the later episodes is not as good.
Oh yeah,
it was probably easier for him to just flow out things that he knew the characters would say and like write plot lines for characters that the audience was going to expect in the future. This is a lot more difficult because he was still establishing the characters and he was actually writing topically. So he's talking about things that were actually affecting people's lives at the time, which is a lot more difficult.
I agree with you. I think I would definitely, if I was comparing like this episode to, let's say, the ones that were produced in the early 2000s, the characters have almost become caricatures by that point. Whereas here they still feel like real people having real conversations. So yes, a completely different type of writing.
Yeah. And also I think it does get a little bit difficult when we're doing the rankings to compare something like this to, if they could see us now. How can you even compare them? That's like trying to compare 2 episodes of 2 different shows in a way. It is really difficult to do. So I don't want anyone to think that any of my rankings for series 1 being in the 50s means that I think these episodes are bad. It's really just a case of my favorites. And I'm not technical, and everyone's going to have their own rankings. I still think this episode is really good.
Well, we'll get into why we think that is as we go through. So, yeah, shall we get on to the episode breakdown, dude?
Yeah, let's go ahead. Okay, so we start with the opening credits, and then the opening scene for this episode is a demolition site, and we see the 3-wheeled van rumbling across the dusty ground and pull up to a stop. Del and Rodney get out. So, first note here, because I've seen a lot of comments on this online, and I'm pretty sure you have a note about it, is Rodney's scarf. Did you write any notes about this?
I did not, but I know exactly. Yeah, of course, I know Rodney's scarf.
Yeah, so I see a lot of other people online just saying, oh my God, why is Rodney wearing that scarf? Like, he looks really strange. And it's kind of out of character because he's never seen wearing it again, as far as I remember. But this is just an interesting little bit of trivia about it. Here, when you see Rodney in this scene, you are seeing almost an exact copy of the original concept sketch for the character of Rodney. So the costume designer, and she was only the costume designer for series 1, but she did establish the look for the characters that was carried forward. Phoebe DeGay, she set the tone for the appearance of the Trotters. Her concept sketch of Rodney was him wearing a keffiyeh, which is a Palestinian liberation scarf. And so I had to do a little research on why he might have been wearing the Palestinian liberation scarf at this time. But I found online that, they did grow in popularity in the late 70s, early 80s as a fashion statement. And it had evolved from being a symbol of Palestinian solidarity to being more broadly representative of liberalism and anti-authority sentiment, which is
which makes sense for Rodney's character because he is quite like that. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. And so Phoebe DeGay actually went out onto the streets of London, the markets, and she drew inspiration from the people that she saw wearing these Rodney's age, like the kind of people that Rodney would be hanging out with. And this is a common thing that they would have been wearing at that time. So even though we look at this now and think it's a little strange, because you compare it to like Rodney of the Cassandra era, and it's so weird to see him standing there wearing a keffiyeh, but it perfectly in keeping with his character of this time, and it's very appropriate for this episode because Rodney's character shows a lot of liberal points of view, whereas you've got Del being the counter a little bit in this episode.
Yeah, I mean, Rodney is portrayed throughout the entire series as someone who does care a little bit about sort of social justice movements. Later he turns vegetarian. He always talks about the rainforest, like in that episode. Yeah. So there's quite a few moments where he's talking about Mother Earth and sort of the plight of people. Even this episode is a lot about that stuff too. So yeah, it's it makes sense for the character, I think, for him to be wearing that.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's that. So we start the episode off. Del tells Rodney that he's bought a big pile of bricks in the hopes that maybe something more valuable might be hiding underneath. He shows Rodney that there's about 3 tons of lead hiding away under there. So at first, Rodney gets very excited with Del, and they calculate about $1,000's worth of profit. So once again, we see Rodney get excited about the profit, and then he suddenly grows a conscience, and he turns around and asks Del,
"Is it ours, Del?" "Of course it's ours. Legally, Del." "Don't split hairs with me, Rodney."
So we cut back to Nelson Mandela House, and the Trotters are bringing all the lead up to the flat. Not quite sure why.
Yeah, so I was going to say, my first thing that I wrote down for this episode is why wouldn't they store it in the garage? That's exactly what I wrote down. It seems ridiculous for them to bring all that. And I don't know, like adding a ton to the weight of the flat, is that a good thing to do for the structure of the building?
Well, yes, 3 tons, right? And then, 3
tons.
But yeah, Del does comment on that. Like, after making poor Grandad carry boxes, he does say...
No, not there, Grandad, not there. No, we've got 3 tons of it here. You see, you've got to spread it out over a wide area. Otherwise, we'd be having tea with Mrs. Oboko downstairs.
I was just trying to look back at the script to see if they say a reason why they're not just storing it in the garage, but I don't think they do they?
No, I don't recall them mentioning it. I mean, presumably it's because they think it's going to get stolen.
Yeah.
That's usually their reason not to do things. But, I mean, I think the Trotters are well known enough on the estate, and their garage will be well known enough on the estate, and Del has got this reputation as a bit of a hard man. Why would people steal from him? He's going to find out who did it.
I don't know. I don't know if they would, though. I feel like it's just a bad estate, and I don't know. I feel like they pick and choose when they use the excuse, "Oh, we have to keep this in the flat," because there's times when he's got a ton of stuff in the garage, and if the garage really had been robbed all the time, like the times that they do sometimes mention, then he wouldn't still have like the lesser watch. So there is a little bit. There's a little bit of
exactly. There's a bit of continuity. Yeah.
Well, actually, in Mother Nature's Son, all of their stock is in Damien's old bedroom, so the lesser watch would have been up there at that point. But don't split hairs. So Grandad is carrying the box, which I feel bad for him. Del has a box that he says is carrying the wrong way, and he flips it the other way up, and it sounds all broken.
Well, look at this, Grandad. You've been carrying this one upside down. This is the way.
Yeah, I'd like to know what was in that box.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I have to say I never pay attention to those arrows on boxes because half the time they're not right. Del's giving Rodney a bit of a hard time about not helping. He's just sitting down reading while everyone else is hulking boxes around him.
All this humping and sweating is not disturbing your Royal Highness.
No, don't you mind me. You carry on.
But Rodney tells Del that he thinks they've got the materials for an experimental do-it-yourself nuclear fallout shelter.
Nuclear fallout shelter. You are a wally.
Del's first instinct is to sell it, but Rodney starts to try to convince him that they might need it and that they're coming close to World War III. So Rodney makes a few good points, which leads them up to discussing the 4-minute warning.
What would you do if you heard the 4-minute warning?
Well, what's it sound like first?
Well, that's it, isn't it? No one knows.
Yeah, so we're getting a little bit of topical stuff here. Seems like there was actually a very strong threat of, like, a very fear of war, like at that time. Yeah. So we start touching on a few serious topics here. Rodney talks about the great powers, so we see his liberalism coming through a little bit here. He tries to convince Del and Grandad to build the shelter. So this is where we get our first mention of Grandad's allotment.
Grandad's allotment? That's only a couple of miles up the road. We could do that in 4 minutes.
Yeah, on a Sunday with a following wind.
Which I don't believe gets mentioned again until Mother Nature's Son. And I think we both remember there is a plot hole in Homesick where Grandad says he's never had a garden.
I've never ever had a garden.
But then we don't know if that's him just trying to get sympathy in that moment from Rodney.
And no one was going to call him out on it because he was too ill and his legs were all...
Yeah, maybe he forgot about his allotment. But yeah, so they agree that to see, they're going to do a dummy run to see if they could actually make it to the allotment in the 4-minute warning. So Rodney runs out the room and gets a stopwatch. And Del says,
all right, so say you can do it in 4 minutes. What is it going to prove? Knowing them Russian rats, they'll probably declare war in the middle of the rush hour.
Yes, I highlighted that line as well. I thought that was very funny.
Do you have any other comments on this scene, this interaction?
Yeah, there was just a couple of things. I thought it was funny when Grandad suggested,
why don't we find a spot in the New Forest?
It's very funny, but it's also like Grandad would be the one you would think that would take this whole thing the most seriously, and
you would,
although
maybe because he's older, he's like, well, if I die, I've already had my life. I mean, there's also that element of it. You could say, I don't know, but yes,
it's still a great line.
I also wrote, I don't know why I wrote this. It must have been one of the lines, and I can't recall. Maybe you can. I wrote, Del is very patriotic about the British Army.
Oh, well, actually, yeah. So I was going to note that. He has an attitude that a lot of people in England have, which is don't worry about it. The government have got this. Like, kind of, they'll take care of it.
No. You don't know what we got up our sleeve, us Brits, Rodney. Do you know that we got a device that can track the movements of any Russian nuclear submarine? They can't keep track on ours.
Yeah, we only got one.
Have we?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, anyway, they don't know where it is.
I've seen people, especially in the US, I hear a lot of this attitude of faith in the government. Don't worry about war. Everything will be okay. So that's probably what you got that vibe. So yeah, I think overall, this continues later with Del being more... patriotic, as you say, and like having more faith in the government, whereas Rodney is anti-government.
Yeah, that was all I had for that scene.
Okay. This is the moment that we cut to Del and Rodney bursting out of Nelson Mandela House. They're going to try and do a dummy run for the 4-minute warning. So this is the most action that we get in the whole episode. This scene is pretty funny. They run to the van and they're about to jump in, and they both look back and Del screams,
Where's Grandad?
I don't know.
And then they both run back and Grandad's only just coming out.
I love their facial expressions when they both realise that they've not got him and then go and drag him in. It's absolutely hilarious the way that he's running at first and then they just drag him. It's absolutely hilarious.
His just feet come off the ground and he loses his shoe and they just throw him in the back. This scene is very funny, and the whole thing is done really well. The way that Rodney keeps on doing the little updates about where the missiles are, and Del's like, shut up. Like,
yeah, so I actually wrote about that. I wrote they could have done it faster without the commentary, because they literally stopped after they put Grandad in the van. They stopped for Rodney to say,
Missiles are just going over Sweden.
Well, they're bloody fast, aren't they? I only left Siberia 20 seconds ago.
as somebody who rushes a lot and tries to shave seconds off everything I do, that is frustrating that they're trying to actually do a dummy run and they stop to have a conversation about how much time they have. Yes. But let's let that slide for comedy reasons. So there's a little moment where they almost pull out in front of the red car, which is very funny. They end up getting pulled over by an extremely old-fashioned looking police car. That made me...
oh my God, it doesn't even look like a police car, does it? It's like light blue. It's the weird... I've never seen a police car that looked like that in my lifetime.
That's because you're too young, right? They must have looked like it. This must be how they looked.
Yeah, I know. It's just, I can't... I was like, that is the fakest police car I've ever seen in my life when I watched the episode.
Yeah, so they end up getting pulled over and we think they're going to get in trouble, but it turns out Del knows the police officer and gets nothing but a minor slap on the wrist, and also the police officer has dialogue that reveals he's actually kind of a con man himself, which I think is very accurate, that a lot of cops let certain things slide for their own benefit.
Yeah, so this is actually, can I just point out, this is a contradiction that I find a bit silly with regards to Del's character, because, you know, you have an episode like The Long Legs of the Law where Del is like afraid of the old Bill and has all this problem with them. And then we see that he's like friends with this police officer. This is the first time we see that, but we also see he's friends with like Hotchkins, or in the episode May the Force Be With You, when we first meet Roy Slater, and he knows him on a first name basis as like Terry. And he talks about the gas fire he sold his mom, like, and all this sort of stuff. Like, Del seems to have this really tight relationship with some police officers, and he also is a known criminal and talks about people like worrying he's a grass. So I don't know how he manages to keep both of those relationships, like be friends with the criminals and be a criminal and be mates with police officers. Like, it just seems like it would be a massively contradictory relationship, but we do see it on a number of occasions that he is able to maintain both. The riots, when they do the rioting in Fatal Extraction, and he goes down the middle and he says things to the police and to the rioters, and he's like friends with both. But he does point out a few times that he can't have people think he's a grass. But wouldn't people think he's a grass if he's mates with the police?
Yeah.
It's just a bit of a weird...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You're right. I mean, I do think there is definitely quite a lot of examples, like you said, over time of him being friends on a certain level with the cops. I guess we don't really know what level, and maybe is there a little bit of a trade-off because he looks after getting them cheap stuff sometimes that they look the other way. Like in this case, he didn't get a fine or anything, didn't get arrested. So maybe it's sort of an understanding, and then when it comes to Roy Slater, all rules go out the window because we know that they have a history and Roy's always trying to get him in trouble. So maybe it's just Slater where the problem is, and every other cop he has an understanding with. Yeah,
I mean that's fine. I think it's just the occasion. I mean, a few times, you know, they talk about the old Bill coming around, like, we don't want the old Bill around here. What are you doing?
Yeah.
Like, as though it's a huge issue if like any policemen come anywhere near him, but he's friends with some. So yeah, I just think that's a bit of a weird one.
You're right. There's definitely inconsistencies there. So the scene wraps up with Rodney saying,
Yeah, how are we doing for time?
We died 45 seconds ago.
Terrific.
We're never going to do this run in 4 minutes.
and Grandad has an idea.
Yeah, so this was Grandad's idea to put it on the roof where we find out. I mean, I'm sorry, spoilers. It's just like, I have a lot to say about that idea later on.
Yeah.
But that is ridiculous.
We'll save that for the end.
Also,
but
I was going to say about the character of Wayne that we don't see. I think it's just quite funny, that police officer, the way that he talks to him. What is it about the name Wayne that's really funny? I feel like I see that in other sitcoms where they overemphasize that name.
Well, I think you might be thinking about Wayne in Miami Twice Part 2 as well. That boat driver was actually called Wayne, I don't know if that's what you're thinking of.
Yes, that is probably what I'm thinking of. Yeah.
I don't know.
Wayne, get over there.
Sounds kind of a name that you would order around. Yeah, I don't know why, but maybe that does just come from these two occurrences of Wayne in Only Fools and Horses. Maybe
it could do. It's a funny name.
Well, the thing.
Sorry, Wayne's out there if you're listening.
I was gonna say that I thought Wayne was credited in the end credits, but he's not.
Well, he shouldn't be. He's not shown, is he? He's just spoken to.
I'm sure that I've seen that somewhere, that he was credited at one point. So I thought maybe there was a scene with the way he actually spoke, but he's not even shown. Like, you don't even see his face. He's just yelled at, right?
No.
So, but yeah. Okay. So yeah, then we cut. So Grandad has an idea. And then
now we're going to get into it. This is where it gets very serious.
Yeah, this is where it gets very difficult to sum up, because we've got no cuts. We've got no action, really. We are moving into what we could consider the stage play like side of the episode.
Can I just ask you, before you go into this, did you do this as two different scenes, a daytime and a nighttime? Because there is a break again here in the nighttime.
Yes, I did know. I do know that it cuts to nighttime this time, but it still isn't really a different scene. But yeah, I know what you mean. I was going to say that it's setting up the whole premise. The end joke, obviously, the episode is the reveal of where the shelter is, because we don't find out. So this is where it starts.
Yes.
Grandad, it pans into the shelter, and we go into the shelter, and we don't find out where the shelter is until the end. So it's some people have mentioned that it's one big build up to one joke at the end. So it's like a one long joke. It's I don't believe that's how it's meant to be written, but it does have, the reveal doesn't come now until the very end that we don't find out. So we'll discuss where the shelter is at the very end of the episode.
At the end, yeah, sure.
So we just start by seeing the air pipe, and it starts like moving, and it turns out Dell's whacking it with a hammer.
Don't do it! Del, this is our air filter, our lifeline. This is our umbilical cord. And one thing you must never do with an umbilical cord is bash it about with an hammer.
So we're going to get a little bit of exposition now, and Rodney's just basically setting us up, telling us that they're practicing for the nuclear war. My first note on this is, would Rodney have been able to convince Del and Grandad to do this? Move into the shelter for a couple of days? I mean, it seems like something...
Not from what we know.
Yeah, because it seems like a hell of a lot of work. I mean, if you look in that room, they've even brought the curtains in from their living room.
Yeah.
They will have
and the calendar.
and the calendar. Yeah, I've got a note on the calendar later. But yeah, it's so much stuff. And they agreed to do it. It's like, it's quite funny.
I agree. And Del also says they stole a toilet from a building site. I mean, that's so gross.
Yeah.
Yeah, Del's character would not be talked into doing this. Del would have sold the lead and ignored Rodney. I mean, this is again one of those things that's maybe a little bit out of character for the purpose of the episode. But, I'm okay with it. I mean, it's fine. It is.
We can ignore that because they did. And Grandad has a little bit of a moment where he's like, come on, like, I can't even get my telly to work or whatever. So, like, he's unhappy. He's like, he's not loving the idea. But again, he agreed
But he gets 3 days away from the housework,
And now he's got fallout shelter work. Yeah. So he's got to keep it tidy. The dialogue starts here. Del's ridiculing Rodney, and we get quite a bit of back and forth that establishes their viewpoints on the war. So Del makes a few might be considered insensitive comments.
Yeah, that's what we ought to do, We ought to drop a bomb on all them Russian cities, you see, and then declare war on them. What we say is that the declaration for war got held up in a post due to a communist-inspired strike at a sorting office.
And it says something about Del selling paving stones to the rioters, which again reminded me of Fatal Extraction.
Yeah, so, there is a reference here that then does come back, in a very far future episode, because it indicates that, like in Fatal Extraction, not necessarily that he sold paving stones, but he definitely sells all the ski gear to the rioters, which you see, all the way in the future in Fatal Extraction.
Anyway, I know a lot of them youngsters down there in Brixton, and their trouble is frustration. Yes, you see, modern society has denied them the birthright of a war.
Okay, so Del makes quite a few what might be considered insensitive comments about war. So this leads us into what is probably the most memorable moment and dialogue of the episode, which is Grandad gets triggered by what he said, and he speaks of his own memories of seeing soldiers return from war.
I remember when I was a little nipper and I saw the soldiers marching off to battle. Oh, yes, it was a glorious sight, all right.
Apart from the meaningful dialogue, this performance really establishes Grandad's acting abilities. It's a standout performance from Leonard Pierce, who we'll talk a little bit more about the history of some of the actors in some of our end of series episodes, but Leonard Pierce was a stage actor. So, you know, obviously he's going to deliver this really well in a live audience setting.
My brother George was at Passchendaele. Nigh on 500,000 Allied troops died there, all for 5 miles of mud.
But I think one thing that's notable about this is you really do feel this vibe as Grandad carries on more and more into his speech, where the audience falls away completely. And it's like deathly silent. You actually hear somebody chuckle a little bit when he says,
I mean, courage like that could put you right off your victory dinner, couldn't it?
but I think then they all realize this is not meant to be a joke. This is not meant to be a punchline.
No, I don't think it's delivered that way either. I think he delivers it completely emotionally and straight.
But you still hear a tiny little bit of laughing, and then it just gets quieter and quieter, and then obviously he says the line that's most memorable.
They promised us homes fit for heroes. They give us heroes fit for homes.
And then it's very quiet. So then Rodney's next line diffuses the tension, where he says,
I'd never wear a British uniform on principle.
What principle?
Well, on the principle that the Russians might shoot at it.
yeah, this is the speech everybody always references in reviews and stuff. So I'd say this would be the most memorable part of the episode, where people really feel a turn is taken, and we're taking things a little bit more seriously here. We're not just a comedy show.
Yeah, I think that it's a very apt response to Dell's sort of ridiculousness, talking about how glorious and valiant war is. And I think, yeah, if you only watch war movies, you might think that yourself. I mean, Dell hasn't been through a war, I haven't been through a war, but when you watch war movies, they very much are portrayed, well, most of them. Obviously, there are some that are a bit more brutal, but a lot of them are portrayed as like, yeah, victory, woo, camaraderie, like all that kind of, the valiant side of war and how glorious it is when you're the victor. That's kind of the stuff that a lot of us know about war if we've never been in one. You know, in the West, most of us that have never been anywhere near a war, that's our main sort of access to it through Hollywood. So of course it's not something we can really process, and it is lovely to hear from someone who's actually been involved in a war, with Grandad giving this speech. And yeah, you know, he says it's all about the realities of war, isn't it? And I think one of the lines that I really think resonates is when he says,
While the nation celebrated, they was hidden away in big grey buildings, far from the public gaze.
And I think that's really what I think we would still do today. And I don't know much about American politics, to be honest, overall, but I do know there's a lot of people always seem to be fighting for the veterans, and a lot of veterans end up, you know, homeless on the streets and stuff. These people that have actually fought for their country, and they still don't have any benefit when they come back, you know, even their healthcare. I think it was Jon Stewart did a huge campaign for it a few years ago, when he went and spoke about the veterans that were sort of not being cared for, even though they did all what they did for the country. I mean, war is a very difficult subject to discuss when you have absolutely no idea what it's like to be in one, and I certainly don't. But yeah, I do think that if someone has fought for their country, they should be looked after. I do think that.
Yeah, I mean, the US has a very... they portray that they care about the veterans in the media, and like a lot of people from an outside viewpoint would think, wow, yeah, the US really looks after its veterans, but that's all just show. I mean, there might be some people that get the right kind of care, but it's my understanding, I don't have much of a background in any other area in the US other than pharmaceutical. Like, I worked in pharmacy for 10 years, and one thing that I am aware of is that there's many drugs and a lot of experimental programs to help veterans deal with trauma that they cannot get access to. They never will. They want to, like, the proven treatments that can really help them, and they have a hard time getting anything. Like, they have to jump through so many hoops, and they do not get anywhere near what people probably believe that they get in terms of support. So not that will surprise anybody.
No, but yeah, it's very aptly put by Grandad in this speech about this stuff. And yeah, politicians telling them their country needed them is something else I wrote down, which again is still going on today. And then, oh yeah, we do have the funny part after this speech, after Rodney's spoken as well. Maybe you wanted to mention that, actually. Sorry if I stepped on your toes.
Yeah, I haven't gone past the speech yet. I was just going to say one other thing, which is that Del, my calculations of age continuity mean that Del was born in 1945. So doesn't that mean that he hasn't lived through a war either? So when he's talking about modern youth having been denied the birthright of a war, he would have been denied the birthright of a war too.
I always thought he was talking. Yeah, I thought he was kind of referring, even though he says modern youth, I think he was also referring to himself a little bit there. But I don't know. I guess he must have been, like you said, he didn't have a war in his birthright.
The reason he says the birthright thing is because he's talking about the youngsters in Brixton, and I don't know whether he means now. Or he's talking about his age group. Yeah, but I don't think he's talking about.
He's basically saying. I just want to make it make sure I understand. He's basically saying that every generation deserves to have a war because then they can learn about all this valiant, glorious sort of victory bullshit.
Yeah, but he would now be too old, and in his youth he was not. He evolved in a war. There was no draft when he was a kid. So is he talking about himself, or is he talking about the youth of today back then?
I mean, Del is a bit of a know-it-all and thinks that he knows about everything. So maybe that's why he's referring to it like that. But yeah, he hasn't been through one either. That's maybe why Grandad pulls him up on it so, harshly.
Yeah, definitely. And Del has a history always, and so does Rodney, really, of talking about stuff that they don't understand and they don't know. Well, I guess doesn't everyone. We're doing it right now,
don't we all? Wait for it. I'm sure we'll say something really ignorant during the course of this recording.
I was just going to say that we already have probably said a lot of stuff that might be considered ignorant, not just in this episode. I think it's really important to understand that not everyone is perfect and everyone has stuff to learn, and there's always things that you can enlighten people about. It's just that it's just not a good way to do it is sending an angry comment and calling someone ignorant. Maybe just slightly just reminding someone of how it actually is, or maybe sending your own anecdotes and your own experiences, and so that they can learn from you in a fair and open setting. Just because someone doesn't understand something doesn't mean you have to yell at them. So obviously Rodney and Grandad and Del always just snap at each other and tell them that they don't understand, tell each other that they don't understand, which is fine.
But you can tell they love each other. You can tell it's coming from a place of love even when they do that. So
yeah, it's a family dynamic. So I have another note here that Grandad mentions his brother George in his speech. He doesn't mention Albert. So I'm guessing at this point John Sullivan hadn't really written the character of Albert.
No.
But he mentions George.
I mean, he wouldn't have needed to write Albert in if Leonard Pierce hadn't died, would he? So it would make sense he wouldn't have written another brother for him.
No, and maybe he meant to only have one brother. My next note is the cut to the nighttime. So did you have another night about another night? Did you have another night?
I have another night. No, I was just going to say I thought it was quite funny, the story that Grandad tells about his brother George when he says,
My brother George lied about his age.
Pretended he was 18?
No, he was 18. He pretended he was 14.
Yeah, that was quite a nice way to end that scene. That was very hard to listen to and quite dark. It was a nice sort of note to end it on.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so well written that you have this mix of the serious and the comedy that right after Grandad's speech and the silence is broken by Rodney making a joke. So yeah, I think it's really well done, well written. So I put here, cut to later that night. The Trotters are all getting ready for bed. So you can see Del's wearing one of his pajama shirts. Rodney's hitting the umbilical cord with a hammer now because he says,
I think there's a pigeon trying to nest in our air tube.
So then we're going to go into this discussion about where Del points out all of the holes in Rodney's plan, like how many batteries they would need to survive.
Yeah.
So yeah, Rodney has calculated that if there was a nuclear war, that they would have to stay in this shelter for 2 years. And Del starts asking him to do a bit of the math about what supplies they might need.
So what we're going to need is 1,450 odd heavy-duty batteries, about 5 ton of canned food, 30,000 gallons of fresh drinking water, and a 3.5 acre warehouse to store it all in.
So then there's some discussion about whether it might be better to survive or die in this war. So again, dipping into the serious again here, Rodney describes some pretty graphic repercussions of staying outside during a nuclear war, which, it's not easy to hear this stuff. And so again, slipping back and forth between comedy and serious. But yeah, it turns out that there's a possibility that Rodney might be kind of thinking about himself in a selfish way. Like if the world was to end and he was to survive, that he could go out and hook up with loads of women.
Yeah, I know. It's a bit of a weird turn that this goes on to here. But just to say something about your note about the way Rodney describes the effects of going outside, I think it's what he's saying is very dark, but I think it's Nicholas Lyndhurst's physicality when he's describing it that makes it funny.
Now, this radiation then penetrates the pores of the skin, causing violent sores and diseases.
That's right. And so they talk a little bit about like mutations and stuff like that, which, again, that they're making it into a comical thing, but it is a serious subject matter. Yeah. But yeah, just to go back to the Rodney talking about the girls. So Del sums up Rodney's opinion by saying,
I see it all now. He's practically praying for the end of civilization just so he can get out there and put it about a bit.
Yeah, so it turns out Rodney has a few ideas about the fact that certain institutions will have also protected civilization against the war, such as girls' schools.
Mm-hmm.
I did notice something pretty funny in the script that I'm going to try to find right now, so I don't know if you have a note that you can read out while I'm searching the script. Did you have any other notes on this scene?
From the stuff you're about to talk about, I think we're going down that road again where Rodney's talking about his sexual fantasies and Del is disgusted by them and calling him a pervert and everything else. I did think it was funny when Rodney says,
"You might fancy the headmistress."
But yeah, Rodney's fetishes, we're always learning more. So he likes policewomen, he likes schoolgirls, so basically he likes anyone who's wearing some sort of uniform of some kind.
No, don't misunderstand me. I mean, the school uniforms are of no importance whatsoever. I don't know why I mentioned them.
It seems to me that that's what Rodney's into. And yeah, Del calls him a...
You sicko.
What do you remember what Del calls the school that they're talking about? It sounds like it begins with an R, and in the script, when Rodney first says it, he says the name of the school. In the script, Rodney calls the shelter the Rodney shelter. In the script, it says here, "You bet your life Rodney's got a shelter," and that's not what's said though.
I mean, you bet your life Rodine's got a shelter.
Because I know it says in the script Del mentions the school, so I was just trying to find what the actual name was.
I was just thinking about all them girls down at that Rodine school. No, nothing like that.
Yeah,
but yeah,
that's later on in the scene, right?
That's later in the scene. But when Rodney says it, he says the Rodney school, or "You bet your life Rodney's got a shelter." That's what he says. But that's what it says in the script. But that's not what he says in the episode, right?
Not what he says in the episode. No, he doesn't. I think I'd have noticed that.
Yeah, when I read that, I was like, "What the fuck?" But I'm like, maybe they hadn't chosen the name at that point.
Well, I will say one thing. Obviously, Grandad says something else here.
War is hell. Alan Ladd said that.
Yeah, I was just saying that Grandad sort of brings it up again, but it's almost like it feels a bit out of place because we've already done sort of that part of the script. Earlier on in the previous scene, we talked about the ins and outs of war, so it's like Grandad's trying to bring it back again.
"War is hell" is a common quote that people say because it was attributed to the American Civil War General William Tecumseh. I don't know how to say it. Sherman.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he's not just saying it out of the blue like a comment. He's referring back to something, but that's why they discuss who said it.
That scene where Del's trying to go to sleep and they're all sort of keep talking reminds me of the scene in the Jolly Boys outing with Albert and Rodney and Del in the hotel room, and they can't get to sleep and they keep talking and saying random things.
Yeah, I thought that too. Yeah. I was just going to say that I hear a lot of people in comment sections say Grandad's speech. They call it the "War is hell" speech, which I guess is incorrect because he doesn't say "war is hell" in that speech. But it all ties together. So yeah, that's all I was going to say. I did write my note here because you can see when Del's sitting on the bed, the calendar is really close, so you can see that it's December. So that just ties into what I was going to say, that this episode is the finale. It's the season finale. And when it was written, it was as far as they knew the last episode. Because Christmas Crackers was very hastily commissioned, like a week or so before Christmas. So it wasn't like they knew that there was another episode. So this is the finale. So the fact that it's the calendar says December is interesting because, for the first time we're seeing the calendar has moved on. I think this is the first time.
Yes.
I know I'm obsessed with the calendar, but that's because I'm obsessed.
No, we mention it because I noticed it too. Like I said, I noticed in the first episode because it's not there in later seasons when like Raquel's moved in and stuff. That's why I was noticing.
I always like to know when things are supposed to be happening, like when, what time, what year, like how long time has passed. I'm always interested to know that, and I think obviously we know that the show was shot over a certain number of months, so it's kind of interesting to see what time like they think it is. But yeah, this is supposed to be December in England, and they're sleeping in a lead shelter outside.
Oh my god, they'd be freezing. and on the roof as well. I mean, that's going to be even colder. You're high up, so spoiler alert. I also wanted to ask about the noblesse. Is French for nobility, is that right?
Yeah, but the way that it's spelled, Lesse, like it's not supposed to be pronounced the way Del's saying it. But yeah, obviously that's just Del.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
Del talking about, the line where they say,
Granddad could be Queen Mother.
yeah, that's right. It was very difficult, like I said, to write notes on this scene because it's a lot of dialogue, and I don't want to just repeat all the dialogue. But yeah, ultimately they're having this conversation and it's sort of panning out, and Del's talking about how they'll be safe as houses, and it drifts out, and this is where we get what would be considered the punchline of the very long joke, which is that they've built the fallout shelter on the roof of a tower block. So
one of the dumbest things you could possibly do.
This is the thing, like you can listen sometimes to some of the things that Rodney and Del's characters say, and even Grandad, and think, wow, they understand, or they're smart in some ways, and then these decisions like knock down all of their credibility. Yeah, like did they really think that their little shelter was going to be safe on the top of a tower block after a nuclear bomb has dropped?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's just, I mean, and the fact that Grandad suggested it, you'd assume that Del and Rodney would straight away have vetoed it. But no, they all were like, yeah, what a great idea. And also, legally, surely they are not allowed to build that on the roof of the tower block.
Yeah, maybe not. I wouldn't know what kind of law enforcement there would have been for something like that at that time in a council flat, whether anybody ever notices or goes up on the roof or cares or anything.
But I mean, if it's like 3 tons, like you said as well, that would be a considerable weight they'd have added to the roof. So that's something else that they probably would have had to take into account.
And sometimes these roofs are not built with any kind of like support structure. So yeah.
No, I wouldn't have thought so. Not those types of council buildings.
But yeah, this actually is the first time we get any kind of different end credits. So the end credits play over the panning out shot of the tower block. And I don't have any information about whether this was the North Acton estate or not. I don't know, but I would have thought that shooting this like footage would have been quite high budget for them at the time.
I mean, it could have been a model.
Yeah, could have been. It doesn't look like one though.
No, it doesn't look like one. That's very true. But yeah, I don't know.
But yeah, that's really all the notes I have on the episode breakdown. Did you have any other comments to add?
No, that's everything from me as well.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, so shall we move on to the awards segment for the week?
And guess what? He's only one.
Okay, yes. So as always, we have 3 awards to announce this week, and we'll start with our plonker of the week.
Plonker.
So for the plonker of the week, we each nominate a plonker, and we will discuss and decide who wins. So Jenny, who is your nomination for plonker this week?
I gotta say, this is really difficult because they're all plonkers, right? I don't know. I wrote down, like, originally I wrote Grandad, and then I was like, oh, it's Rodney's idea, but you've got to admire his passion. And then I was like, I guess overall I would say Del is the biggest plonker for agreeing, because it's such a waste of money and time to do this. And he doesn't even really agree with it. So you got to wonder what's his motivation.
Yeah, so I had 2, but one is the silly one that I was just, because, I always try and nominate a bit outside of the main sort of cast. So yeah, I put Del, but for a different reason. I put his glorification of war, rightfully called out by Grandad, makes him a plonker. Because, yeah, his thoughts on war are pretty plonkerish. But my light-hearted nomination was Wayne for messing with the siren.
Yeah, he couldn't figure out how to turn off the siren. Yeah,
so what a plonker, not knowing how to operate a siren when you're a police officer.
Yeah.
So, yes. Or also the second red car.
Yeah,
for not knowing it was the second red car.
Yeah, but honestly, that's Rodney being a plonker, because if you say this red one as the driver, yeah, I mean, really, there's just so.
But he didn't see there was a second one, though, did he?
There's so many plonkers in this episode. Yeah.
Yeah, true.
I mean,
but yeah, I think we can agree. Del's the plonker for two different reasons.
Yeah, so. I would say if anything, you give him the award for his glorification of war and his like strained attitude towards war, because the fact that he went along and did this for Rodney, even though he didn't agree with it, is nice in a way. So yeah, let's give him the plonker award for not understanding the horrors of war. Okay, so Del is plonker of the week.
Glorious, valiant war, that.
Well done, Del.
Woo.
Okay, I think it's your first time getting it, isn't it, Del? I don't know if we've given it.
I can't remember. When we do the series summary, I'll go back through and I'll write down who all our plonkers are, because I can't already remember who we've given the plonker.
No, yeah, that's true. Okay, so Jenny, you have got the best line of the episode for us this week, right?
Yes. Okay. So for best line of the episode, I have chosen.
They promised us homes fit for heroes. They give us heroes fit for homes.
And the reason I chose that line specifically, I do think the whole speech is excellent, but if we're going for line, that line is the best line of the week. I don't think there's any dispute about that. I think it's obvious why I chose that line.
Yeah, and I think this is definitely the first time that we've given a best line for meaning rather than comedic reasons.
Yeah, I think so.
Because usually best line is the funniest line, whereas this time we've given it for emotional reasons, for gravity. Actually,
yeah, that's something that's probably worth mentioning at this stage, since we are nearly towards the end of series 1, is that when we originally thought about awards to give, we said funniest line because it's a comedy, but we decided to change the awards to best because best isn't always funniest, and the show like Only Fools and Horses, you really need to focus on the fact that there's a lot of quality that comes from the other side of it. It's not just what's the funniest line, what's the punchline, what's the moment that everyone laughs the most. Some of the best lines in Only Fools and Horses are not funny. So that's true. Yeah, and in this episode is a classic example of how that started, really.
No, I completely agree. So yes, best line is going to Grandad this week, and then we have the best moment, and I'll let you know what the best moment is. So the best moment of this episode is the dummy run when they go out in the car to do the 4-minute warning dummy run, because that is until they get stopped by the police, that sequence until then is, I think, very funny, but particularly the part where they drag Grandad out and put him in the back of the van, that is laugh out loud funny. So I think that moment is the funniest moment of the episode. I guess this one for best moment I am choosing based on funny, but of course, yeah, it could also be the same moment that you've chosen for the best line, which is the speech by Grandad, because that is also a great moment of the episode and a moment that most people remember the episode for.
Yeah, it's true. I think, yeah, in this case you could divide them up. Definitely the comedy in this episode comes from the 4-minute warning sequence, but yeah, the moment, if you want to call it a moment, yeah, maybe the pause after Grandad's speech.
Both are contenders for different reasons. Yeah. So I think it's good. Do you have any more honourable mentions at all for any of the awards that you want to bring up?
No, not really. I think there's lots of funny, quippy lines, but nothing's gonna come anywhere close to Grandad's speech.
Okay, so drink up, we're leaving.
Okay, so that about wraps it up for this week. Join us next week when we'll be discussing Series 1, Episode 7, technically, also Christmas special 1981, Christmas crackers. Until then,
au revoir, listeners. If you like what you hear and want to contact us, you can email us at longlivehooky street podcast@gmail.com. All one word, no spaces. Bonjour.